Hey, I hope you guys are doing good today. We are on to part 2 of the murder of JonBenet Ramsey, and this one is called The First 48. So I'm going to assume that we are probably going to be looking at the first 48 hours. If you do get a chance, I'd appreciate if you can leave a like and subscribe. It helps me out a bunch. And I will have the Lore Lodge's video linked in my description below, so be sure to give him a like and subscribe. I really appreciate that he has put together this playlist so we can get a nice kind of deep dive into this case. But all right, let's get started. The first 48.
It all began with a call at 6:30 in the morning from her sergeant.
He said there's been a kidnapping. It involves a 6-year-old girl. There was a ransom note, a 2.5-page ransom note. And according to the ransom note, there was going to be a phone call from the author, and they were supposed to call between 8 and 10 a.m. So I was supposed to get to the house for purposes of monitoring the phone call.
FBI agent Ron Walker arrived at the police department headquarters at 1805 33rd Street in downtown Boulder at approximately 11 a.m. on December 26, 1996. A behavioral analyst working out of the Denver field office, Agent Walker was given the nod at 8:15 that morning after Boulder PD Sergeant Bob Whitson called in to inform the FBI of a kidnapping on a quiet street in one of the city's better neighborhoods. After waiting another 45 minutes at the station, Walker received a briefing from Sergeant Larry Mason, who went over everything the department knew so far. It was strikingly little. Just before 6 o'clock that morning, the Boulder Police Department had received a 911 call from the Ramsey household at 755 15th Street, reporting a kidnapping and a ransom note. The victim was a 6-year-old child beauty pageant star, and the only suspects listed so far were an ex-employee of the father's company Access Graphics and a housekeeper, while the note's author had referred to the perpetrator, in fact, perpetrators, as a small foreign faction unhappy with the American government.
Right.
Police had searched the house twice and found no sign of a break-in, though a family friend by the name of Fleet White discovered a broken window in the basement. The fact that Fleet White had been allowed to walk around the house without an officer present at all may have struck Walker as odd, but the ransom...
That still just gets me, though. That still gets me, especially like when you watch like so much true crime stuff and then they come to the scene. How was he allowed to just roam free and touch stuff and, kind of go wherever he wants? That still just baffles me.
To walk around the house without an officer present at all may have struck Walker as odd, but the ransom note was the real eye-catcher. The first thing that caught my eye about the note itself, he later told the team working on the CBS docuseries The Case of JonBenet Ramsey, was the length of the note. He described the 2.5-page letter as highly, highly unusual in the realm of kidnappings.
Right.
A sentiment Detective Steve Thomas described as common amongst the FBI agents who viewed the document. Thomas himself would later call it the War and Peace of ransom notes, but that wasn't the only oddity. One of the first portions of the letter that stuck out to Agent Walker was the small foreign faction aspect. If you're gonna kidnap somebody, he said, what you're gonna do is convey an image of authority and power. The fact that this rather...
Ooh, that is a good eye there. Because, yeah, it seems like in ransom notes, it's like you are very demanding in them. Like, at least like the few that like I've ever come across and watching some of these videos is that ransom notes. Yeah, like it does have like an authoritative tone to it of like, these are our demands. This is what we want. It's very like XYZ, straight to the point, where this is like a whole novel that got written out.
He said, what you're gonna do is convey an image of authority and power. The fact that this rather verbose note said otherwise, likely in conjunction with the fact that the demanded sum was both lower than normal and a very specific number, led him to believe that the note was a red herring, something planted to throw off any investigation. As Walker mulled over the note at Boulder Police Department headquarters, he was made aware of yet another development. At about noon, Sergeant Mason had received a page from Detective Linda Arndt, who informed him that she had not seen John Ramsey in about an hour and a half. For most of the morning, John had been bouncing around the first floor of the home as the police anxiously awaited a call from JonBenet's captors. Expected to come
Okay.
sometime between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m., those
Right.
hours had come and gone without any contact from the kidnappers. But neither of the Ramseys seemed to notice. Detective Arndt found that odd, though, according to former FBI profiler and Ramsey attorney consultant John Douglas, Ramsey considered that since it was unknown at which time the note was written, tomorrow could have meant the 27th, but it was hard for anybody to be sure. Either way, it meant that something wasn't right with this situation, and JonBenet's bedroom was taped off for evidentiary purposes at 10:30 a.m. With little else to do at the home and a change in strategy required, the majority of the police presence at the Ramsey house was called back to the department. And this left Detective Linda Arndt and Officer Rick French as the sole police officers there to keep track of 7 civilians, all of whom were now witnesses to the crime scene. French
Oh my God. So it was just the two of them and then 7 people in this house that were just running amok. I mean, that's what it sounds like. It sounds like the people that are not law enforcement or anything like that. Everybody was just like running amok in here.
to keep track of 7 civilians,
Oh my gosh.
all of whom were now witnesses to the crime scene. French had to guard the door, and it may have been because of this lack of manpower that Arndt lost track of John Ramsey around 10:40 a.m. When the missing girl's father reappeared around noon, Detective Arndt found him reading his mail in the dining room, noting that one leg was bouncing up and down, and that his demeanor had changed. While he'd been cordial and calm all morning, he now seemed uncomfortable and anxious. And as 1 p.m. rolled around, Ron Walker suggested that Arndt take Ramsey around the house for another sweep, primarily for the sake of keeping him busy and within her line of sight. Arndt intended to start this sweep at the top of the house, the Ramsey's third-floor bedroom, but before she could take Ramsey upstairs, he grabbed Fleet White by the arm and took him downstairs to the basement. Moments later, John found his daughter.
That's kind of weird. So you did have somebody that was willing to sweep the house with him, and then he took his buddy and went down into the basement. That is kind of odd.
Fleet White by the arm and took him downstairs to the basement. Moments later, John found his daughter in a room that they referred to as a wine cellar and made his way upstairs with her after removing the tape from her mouth and the cord from one of her wrists. Less than 20 minutes later, Sergeant Larry Mason arrived on scene with Agent Ron Walker in tow, and an entirely different kind of investigation now on their hands.
Right.
Walker had been skeptical of the kidnapping story since the moment he first read the ransom note, and the revelation that this was now a homicide only deepened his suspicions about who had in fact hurt JonBenet.
I mean, like I definitely don't blame him, because if you already have like red flags kind of going off from reading the ransom note, and now you're in a murder case situation because, like, now it's shifted since we found her. It definitely starts putting lots of eyes on lots of people, I feel like, and especially like, it's like you're going to look at the parents first. I feel like that's always like step one, is that you look at the parents first, and any other like kind of direct family members. Like that's kind of like where we start. This man sounds very interesting to me. I'm very interested to see like what kind of things he pulls from this as we go through this.
Only deepened his suspicions about who had in fact hurt JonBenet, as well as if there was ever a kidnapping at all. The statistics were clear. When a child is murdered in the home, it is almost never by a stranger, and more often than not, a family member is the one who perpetrates the crime. On the other hand, this was a wealthy family with a locally famous daughter, so it was within the realm of possibility that someone had in fact broken into the home, taken JonBenet, and, whether they originally planned to or not, killed her. The evidence left behind would tell investigators which it was, but they were going to need a lot more of it to come to any sort of conclusion. When Walker entered the Ramsey home, he saw that JonBenet was placed in the living room by the Christmas tree, but was informed that she had actually been found in the basement. When John brought his daughter upstairs, he had initially placed her body on the floor in the foyer, and then Detective Linda Arndt moved the body a second time. The detective should have known better than to do so, but
but I guess I don't know. I guess at this point, putting her in the foyer doesn't sound like the best idea. I mean, moving her all is a bad idea. But if he brought her into the foyer, I mean, I could see like where maybe that what might have been maybe not the best place. So then she moved her to put her maybe somewhere more a little bit more secluded.
Detective Linda Arndt moved the body a second time. The detective should have known better than to do so, but the more pressing matter was the fact that the body was no longer in the location in which it had actually been found.
Right.
Not only did this make it more difficult to collect evidence, but the removal of the tape and cord, as well as John's decision to lay a blanket over top of her, contaminated the remains even further. If the situation wasn't already bad enough, it became even worse when Patsy Ramsey threw herself over her daughter's body and began weeping. In addition to that, Fleet White had handled the tape, and his and everyone else's fingerprints, shoe prints, and DNA were all over the house.
Right, so then you'll never be able to distinguish, like, you got everybody's DNA everywhere, and so we don't know what was originally on there.
For the forensics people, this was damn near the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
The crime scene was a disaster, and even though homicide is usually handled by local or state authorities, it would have been a waste to forgo Ron Walker's presence as an experienced set of eyes and ears. To that end, he accompanied Sergeant Mason as the officer made his way into the basement. The first thing the agent noticed upon entering the train room was the set of 3 windows seated near the top of the wall, in particular, the broken one. Beneath it lay a suitcase, which led Walker to question if perhaps the plan had been to conceal JonBenet's body within the suitcase in order to remove it from the crime scene. Walking around to the so-called wine cellar, in reality an old coal room, according to John Ramsey, Mason and Walker made their way into the small windowless chamber. The lights were on, and on the ground lay the blanket JonBenet had been wrapped up in when she was found, as well as a pink Barbie nightgown, allegedly her favorite. Puzzling, he thought, and it was not to be the last puzzle of the day. At approximately 1:40 that afternoon, Detective Bill Palmer overheard Ramsey speaking on the phone and making arrangements to fly to Atlanta that afternoon or evening. Due to the nature of the situation, Palmer politely informed the father that he couldn't leave town as he would need to stay to assist in the investigation of the murder of his daughter.
Why would you leave? I mean, I understand that, like, you might have business to attend to, but I would say that this would take precedence over anything else. Like, your child has been murdered, and you are just like, oh yeah, like, I just gotta fly out tomorrow. I mean, that is crazy. That's crazy. That is wild. I mean, I get that, people deal with things in weird ways, but this just seems like, this seems totally bizarre to me.
As he would need to stay to assist in the investigation of the murder of his daughter. Thinking the episode slightly odd, Palmer proceeded to tell Mason about what he had heard. The sergeant approached Ramsey and asked him why he felt the need to go to Georgia, at which point John reportedly explained that he had to leave to attend a meeting he couldn't miss.
I think you can miss a meeting. Considering the circumstances, I would say I think everybody at that meeting would find it very understandable if you were not present for it. This is crazy. Like, what? I have to go to a meeting? Bruh.
He explained that he had to leave to attend a meeting he couldn't miss. Earlier that morning, John and Patsy had told investigators that it had been their plan to fly to Michigan on the 26th. It took some convincing, but Sergeant Mason was eventually able to convince John Ramsey that it was really best for everybody if he stuck around.
Why would you have to convince somebody to stay? Oh my God. That actually makes me a little bit angry. It makes me a little bit angry to hear, because like, if you have to convince a parent, one of the parents, to stay because your child got murdered, I don't know. I feel like that's a little bit infuriating to hear.
Able to convince John Ramsey that it was really best for everybody if he stuck around. The first 48 hours of any homicide investigation are crucial to solving the case, as this is the time frame in which the crime scene is the most pristine, memories are most fresh, and the police have the most control over the flow of information. At this point, they were already dealing with a botched crime scene, so it was of paramount importance that the Ramseys be around to answer questions for the investigators.
100%.
With the house designated as a crime scene and the police adamant that the Ramseys must remain in town, they needed to find a place to stay for the night. It was ultimately determined that they would stay with the Fernies, who were the first set of family friends to arrive that morning. The Ramseys were picked up by a taxi at approximately 2:15 that afternoon, and by 2:35 p.m., the only person remaining inside of the Ramsey home was a lifeless JonBenet. Back at the police station, Commander John Eller gathered everybody relevant to the case for a briefing. Present in the room were prosecutors from the DA's office, several victim advocates, the city's public information officer, and 3 FBI agents, including Ron Walker, but that would not last very long. Homicides aren't federal offenses, so this was in Boulder's hands. Walker advised Eller to look at the parents, and then he and another agent from Denver left, promising future FBI assistance if it were needed. Another agent local to Boulder reportedly stuck around to help. But other than that, it was up to Commander Eller and the DA's office to get to the bottom of this and then prosecute the case. Eller's first order of business was securing interviews with the Ramseys, though they were not being considered as official suspects at the time. That honor fell first to Linda Hoffman Pugh, who had been named by Patsy Ramsey as a potential perpetrator. The family's housekeeper was one of the few people to whom the Ramseys had entrusted a key to the home. And Linda had recently asked for a $2,000 loan in order to cover some expenses such as rent. Police had already established surveillance at her Fort Lupton home, and it was suggested that they obtain a warrant for a search of the premises as well. In addition to that warrant, officers...
I mean, that's fair. That's fair. I mean, like, you got to check everybody out. So I don't necessarily think this is like good, bad, or anything like, this is just covering your bases, and you're just doing what you got to do right here. Does she seem like the most likely suspect? I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that, at least right now.
That they obtain a warrant for a search of the premises as well. In addition to that warrant, officers were also interested in obtaining access to John Ramsey's office at Access Graphics, as the ransom note specified a number that only a family member or someone with access to John's records would know, his $118,000 end-of-year bonus.
Right.
An additional development was with regard to the ransom note, which had been placed under the care of Detective Jeff Kithcart. While at the scene earlier that day, Sergeant Bob Whitson had requested writing samples from both parents, and it was reported that, without hesitation, John Ramsey had picked up 2 tablets of white-lined paper, one from a countertop and the other from a hallway table a few steps from the spiral staircase, and handed them to the policeman. One, mostly full of notes about business, Whitson had labeled John. The other, on which the first 4 pages were covered with doodles, lists, and other writing in a feminine hand, he labeled Patsy. While reviewing them just prior to the briefing, Kithcart found what appeared to be something of a practice note written in Patsy's pad. It wasn't much, just a simple Mr. and Mrs. I written in the same hand as the actual note, but it suggested something very important. The ransom note appeared to have been written inside the home, not brought in from the outside. It was surmised that the I in Mr. and Mrs. I...
That's weird too, because if you were going to conduct this sort of, quote unquote kidnapping, right? Wouldn't you already have your note written? Because why would you spend time in this? You probably don't want to spend too much time in this house if you're kidnapping a child. So why wouldn't you have this note written beforehand? Why? And on top of that, you would sit down and write this 2.5-page ransom note while just sitting in this house. I mean, that seems crazy.
Not brought in from the outside. It was surmised that the I in Mr. and Mrs. I was the first downward stroke of writing the letter R. And then another relevant detail brought before those assembled was a minor change in Patsy's story regarding the discovery of the note. When Officer French arrived early that morning, JonBenet's mother said that she checked in on her daughter, saw she wasn't in bed, and then found the note on her way down to the kitchen. Later on, she told Detective Arndt that she found the note first and checked in on JonBenet as a result. A potentially insignificant inconsistency, but at this stage of the investigation, and with so little actually known for certain, every little discrepancy needed to be looked at under a microscope.
True, because this is unfortunately, this is a whole dumpster fire of a crime scene. So, yeah, I think if there's the smallest thing out of place between, what people are saying, that's pretty much you're going to have to check it out, because you have just the whole, I can't believe at how much of a mess this has turned into, or that how this was.
Known for certain, Every little discrepancy needed to be looked at under a microscope.
Yeah.
Police wanted handwriting samples, notes, pens and paper, tape, and cord, Steve Thomas wrote. Within minutes, they were off and running. But as the hours passed, the search warrants for John's office and the actual Ramsey household did not materialize. Commander Eller asked where the search warrants were, Thomas continued, and was told the district attorney's office was demanding a string of rewrites and revisions.
Oh my
In particular,
God.
they were holding up the warrant for the Ramsey properties. According to Thomas, Eller knew that a detective could normally hammer together such a warrant in an hour, but this one was stalled until the DA's office would turn it loose. Until the detectives could get their hands on a warrant, they would need to content themselves looking for evidence outside of the Ramsey home. All right, okay, it's been about an hour and a half. Probably got another 3 hours or so to go. As you can see, these filming sessions are a lot longer than the finished product you see here on YouTube, but thankfully, I have my Holzkern right here to keep us on track. One of the things that you'll often hear me say in the sponsor segments on our channel is that we really make an effort to only advertise products we feel are genuinely high quality and from brands that we enjoy working with. So when Holzkern approached us and asked us if we would be willing to do an integration with them, I cannot describe how excited I was. Obviously, here we have this kind of rustic aesthetic. We got wood everywhere, stone everywhere. We got this, well, it's a gas fireplace, but it looks like wood. But that's just kind of what we like. And it's what a lot of men like as well. And that's why this holiday season, if you've got a man in your life that you're looking to purchase for, Holzkern might be a good option. Their watches, their jewelry, all of it is crafted from high quality materials. We've got real wood, real metal, real stone, and it comes in these beautiful boxes. And one of the other things that I really love about Holzkern, aside from the fact that these watches and bracelets and necklaces are handmade in Austria and they're still extremely affordable, is the just sheer variety available. Jewelry is such a personalized aspect of our lives. It's something that we spend a good amount of money on if we're gonna buy a piece, so we want it to really reflect who we are. And when you go to Holzkern's website, you can see that there are just so many options. And it's not just options for men. They make watches for women, they make necklaces for women, they make bracelets for women. I think there's even rings, if I'm not mistaken. And another really cool thing, just something that I think is very special about this brand, is that each one is made with real wood. And that means that you're gonna have a different pattern, you're gonna have different grain than any watch, even of a similar model. And right now, if you're catching this video when it premieres, then it is the Christmas season, and it is the perfect time to give the gift of Holzkern. Orders typically take 2 to 5 business days to arrive, so if you place your order by December 19th, they guarantee it will get to you by December 25th. So if you think that a Holzkern watch, bracelet, necklace, anything is the right gift for somebody in your life, or if you just want to get something nice for yourself, then you can go to holzkern.com/lorelodge to get 15% off this holiday season. That is holzkern.com/lorelodge and use code lorelodge at checkout to get 15% off site-wide this holiday season. Not long after
I'm very interested to see how the CSI Boulder is gonna how they deal with this, because I don't know. I don't have the highest expectation of Boulder. I also don't have the the most positive opinion about Boulder. So I'm very interested to see how this is going to all work out and play out.
JonBenet's body was found, detectives Fred Patterson and Greg Idler pulled up to the Fort Lupton home of Linda Hoffman-Pugh and her husband Merv. Upon being informed that earlier that morning JonBenet had been kidnapped, the housekeeper's first words were, oh my God," as she began to exhibit signs of distress. Patterson withheld the full truth of the matter and tried to calm her down as he explained that there was a note and that they were speaking to a number of people who knew and worked for the family. Without so much as an intimation that she had been accused, Hoffman-Pugh exclaimed, oh my God, I would never do anything like that. Such a response could be considered a sign of a guilty mind, but as the conversation went on, it appeared that she knew nothing about the details of the case. She told the investigators that several months earlier she had talked to Patsy about JonBenet and...
Well, I mean, she probably just figured that that's why they were there, you know, so maybe just subconsciously, because it is law enforcement that showed up, that she would be like, I would never do this. And she's still, kind of freaking out. So I don't know if that inherently like necessarily like makes you feel or like makes you guilty. Sure, it's maybe like a little odd, but I don't know. Like sometimes I think we have to take in consideration that like we can say like, I would never say this and this is not how I would behave, right? But like that's us. And so like the way that some other people behave sometimes as odd, or like maybe something that might come off as a little strange, isn't inherently bad or guilty necessarily.
She told the investigators that several months earlier she had talked to Patsy about JonBenet and Burke walking to school alone, writes James Kohler, and JonBenet playing outside on her skates. Given JonBenet's budding celebrity status in town, the housekeeper was concerned that somebody might try to take JonBenet while she was unsupervised. She told Patterson and Idler that she had talked.
That is a very valid reason, though. That I feel like that is a very valid observation to make, especially if you have a child that is in the beauty pageant realm, because there's some creeps out there. There are creeps out there. And, and if they figure out like where she is and know that she is unsupervised at certain times of the day, like if she's outside playing or something, I mean, that is literally like how kids get snatched up, is that they're riding to their friend's house and nobody's watching them, or they're walking to school and nobody's, by themselves and there's no adults around. So it's, I mean, I feel like that is a very fair observation to make.
Take JonBenet while she was unsupervised. She told Patterson and Idler that she had talked to no one other than Patsy about those concerns and proceeded to answer a number of questions. Despite her anguish, she was able to provide a few nuggets of information. She and her husband Merv, who reportedly appeared intoxicated at the time, agreed that it would be difficult to locate the wine cellar unless one was familiar with the house. All you gotta do is turn around in that goddamn place, Merv offered, and you don't know where you're going. Police were aware that the layout of the home was complicated, to say the least, but what they hadn't been told was that JonBenet actually had problems with incontinence. Linda explained that for the first 6 months she'd worked there, JonBenet wet the bed every night, and Patsy even had the girl in pull-up diapers. The problem resolved itself for a time, but it had resumed about a month prior to this interview. In addition, she'd once found fecal matter the size of a grapefruit on JonBenet's sheets. As for the $2,000 loan request that caused Patsy to name Linda Hoffman-Pugh as a suspect, she explained that she needed the money to pay rent, some dental bills, and some truck repair bills. She would repay the loan by having $200 a week taken out of her paycheck until the full amount had been repaid. Finally, after the questioning had gone on...
Well, I mean, that sounds pretty reasonable, and it doesn't sound like... I mean, obviously she was like, okay, well, like, just deduct it from my paycheck every week until I pay it off. So, I mean, that doesn't necessarily sound terrible, and it's not like she disappeared from it. But as far as like JonBenet's like incontinence here, I didn't know any of that. I mean, oof.
Out of her paycheck until the full amount had been repaid. Finally, after the questioning had gone on for some time, Linda and Merv asked the detectives if JonBenet was gone or if she was still missing at that moment. Patterson then had the unfortunate responsibility of explaining to Linda Hoffman-Pugh that JonBenet Ramsey had been murdered, and the housekeeper's reaction seemed nothing short of pure devastation. She screamed, Kohler writes, and broke down so completely that the investigators were unable to complete as thorough an interview as they had desired. Linda was inconsolable and was wailing in sympathy for Patsy, who she said she loved like she was her own daughter. The detective decided that it would be best to return the following day, after the woman had time to collect herself and process the information. They took fingerprints, readily given over by the couple, and Linda actually wrote a quick note of condolence and asked that it be delivered to Patsy. Back in Boulder, detectives were still waiting on warrants to search the Ramsey home, but Commander Eller didn't need a warrant to post a protective detail around the Fernie property, where the Ramseys were spending the night. According to Detective Steve Thomas, police on the scene were asked to take notes regarding what they saw and heard while watching over the family. At this point in the investigation, they were not yet officially suspects, but the police had taken Agent Walker's words to heart. Look at the family. Officers assigned to that detail reported that throughout the night of December 26th, they watched John and Patsy alternately sleeping, roaming the halls, and just sitting around, seemingly lost to the world. And they rarely spoke to one another. Patsy specifically spent much of the evening in a stupor on the living room floor after taking a Valium issued by Dr. Francesco Boff, her children's pediatrician and a family friend. John also took a couple of Valium and walked through the house drinking scotch, occasionally stumbling. And at one point...
Okay, well, I mean, I get maybe you need a little bit of a tranquilizer because of something that is this horrific, but, you know, mixing alcohol with it, probably not the best idea.
Couple of Valium and walked through the house drinking scotch, occasionally stumbling. And at one point, an officer heard him gently crying, saying, "I'm sorry, I'm so very sorry." At about 9 p.m., Thomas continues, John lay beside Patsy for around 10 minutes, but then got up and left her again. Nothing was observed.
I will say, though, I mean, like, even though he said that, you could take it as a couple ways, right? Like him being like, "I'm sorry," could be like, oh, like maybe he feels guilty because, you know, he's involved in it some way. You could also take it as like, "I'm sorry that I didn't protect you as a father either." Although his behavior has been kind of weird about like leaving, like flying out to a meeting, like that is weird. But I don't know if you can you can kind of only take that with a grain of salt, kind of, you know, because it's not really admitting anything. I mean, this whole situation is very odd. So to kind of, you know, hear that and be like, oh, like that's something, you know, I totally get.
John lay beside Patsy for around 10 minutes, but then got up and left her again. Nothing was observed to have been said, and shortly after, John left the house entirely. Patsy reportedly woke up about an hour later and asked the Fernies where her husband and son were, then began sobbing, "Why did they do this? Why did they do this?" Another hour passed, and around 11 p.m., Patsy's two sisters, Pam and Polly, arrived at the residence. They first demanded to know from a police officer if suspects had been found and if the FBI was involved, and then settled in beside Patsy and read the Bible to her. According to Thomas, one said she had a vision in which JonBenet was an angel, and a police officer later noted the Bible verses they read dealt with forgiveness. John returned to the house at about midnight, took more Valium, and then went to sleep on the floor. Patsy, distraught, woke up occasionally throughout the remainder of the night to ask for more Valium and expressed that she no longer had a reason to live. While police monitored the situation at the Fernie residence, crime scene techs under Detective Mike Everett were preparing to return to the Ramsey house. It had taken hours, but police were eventually able to get a warrant to search the property approved late that night, and investigators finally returned to the Ramsey home to continue their processing of the scene, where the seal on the front door was broken at 20:36 hours on the evening of December 26, 1996. Inside the sprawling maze that was 755 15th Street, CSIs carefully worked their way through the residence, James Kohler wrote, videotaping the premises before any additional processing took place. The footage was eerie. Anything left out in the home from that morning could be a clue as to what happened. The bowl of pineapple and milk that was found sitting out on the dining room table could have been a midnight snack. The Maglite brand heavy-duty flashlight sitting on the kitchen counter could bear the prints of an intruder. Some clues, however, were less straightforward. On the stair landing just outside the victim's bedroom were a washer and dryer and some wall cabinets, wrote Steve Thomas, and the door of one cabinet stood wide open, with a large package of pull-up diapers hanging halfway off the shelf. Strange, given the age of the children in the home, but possibly connected to the bedwetting issues. As the videographer made his way through JonBenet's bedroom and...
Don't they say that like kids that have like some trauma or stress, they will wet the bed too? Like... past where they should be because like it's like some psychological thing.
But possibly connected to the bedwetting issues. As the videographer made his way through JonBenet's bedroom and into her bathroom, his camera recorded a child-sized red turtleneck sitting on a counter next to the sink. Not dissimilar from the one Patsy had described JonBenet as having worn to bed when she first spoke to Officer French. A couple of odd brown stains marked the floor next to JonBenet's bed, but aside from that, the room looked like that of any 6-year-old girl of the Ramsey family station. The tech completed his videotaped scan of the home, and then it was time for medical examiner Dr. John Meyer to get to work on his somber task. He removed the blanket that John had thrown over JonBenet's torso and the sweatshirt Fleet had used to cover her feet. Her blonde hair was up, formed into 2 ponytails, and she wore a white long-sleeve t-shirt with a silver sequin star on the chest, as well as long johns that appeared stained with urine. As Meyer turned her body over, he uncovered something embedded in the flesh of JonBenet's neck. Her killer had wrapped a white cord around her throat, tied off at her spine by a slip knot, with the other end knotted around a straight, varnished stick broken at both ends. It was a garrote, and one in which JonBenet's gold cross necklace had become entwined. Meyer also took note of several other visible injuries aside from the garrote, which itself appeared to be the most likely instrument for the cause of death. Below her right earlobe and right jawline were 2 abrasions with a small amount of blood around the nasal passages.
So that's got to be like premeditated then, right? Like, I mean, like you brought a weapon to use on her. Essentially, if I feel, whoever did this, this seems like a little bit premeditated.
Jawline were 2 abrasions with a small amount of blood around the nasal passages. Also of note were the wrist bindings, one of which John had pulled off when he initially found the body. The process took only 7 minutes, and Meyer zipped JonBenet into a body bag without performing 2 routine procedures that would have helped establish the time of death.
Oh my God. See, What did we not do?
To a body bag without performing 2 routine procedures that would have helped establish the time of death. Those being the sampling of vitreous fluids from the eye and checking internal body temperature. Any determination would need to be made the next day.
How would you not do this? Oh my God. It's like everything that could go wrong goes wrong with this so far. Literally everything.
With Dr. Meyer's work finished, the CSI team got about the rest of their business, with particular interest paid to the basement. In the train room, investigators took a detailed look at the broken window. It was the middle one in a set of 3, all of which were a uniform 18 by 30 inches. There was a large hole in the top left pane where the glass had been shattered, and there was no screen on the exterior side. According to Detective Steve Thomas, one of the techs noticed pieces of glass outside of the window and a scuff mark on the wall, while the dust, film, and debris on the windowsill were undisturbed. Outside, the narrow well was covered by a black iron grate, upon which they found intact spider webs still attached from the grate to the bricks. In addition to the spider webs found on the grate, there were also spider webs in the corners of the window that themselves did not appear to have been disturbed either. And after taking a look at the foliage surrounding the grate, the techs noted that it too appeared to be undisturbed. While the window was just large enough for a grown man to slip through, it certainly did not appear that anyone had done so recently. On the other side of the basement, around the corner and through the boiler room, Detective Mike Everett discovered a half-dozen oil paintings on canvas and an artist's plastic tote box belonging to Patsy. Something inside that box caught the investigator's eye. It was a narrow, broken stick splotched with color. It would soon be...
Oh, so they took a paintbrush and they broke it and then they made that garrote? Is that what they're putting together? So everything was found inside this house.
Investigator's eye. It was a narrow, broken stick splotched with color. It would soon be determined that the size and breakage pattern on this stick matched that of the garrote handle, meaning that the presumptive murder weapon was most likely manufactured in that very room. Wood splinters also matching that stick, which, based on the paint splotches and all that, was believed to be a paintbrush, were also found on the floor next to the box, confirming that theory. Everett took a look around. Nearby, somebody's high-tech brand boot had left an impression of the logo and a patch of mildew, but only the logo. The CSI team wrapped up the remainder of their work, and everyone left the house at 12:21 a.m. on December 27, 1996. They had spent just shy of 4 hours inside the home. As investigators were...
For as large as this house is, does 4 hours seem like not quite long enough to be in there? I'm just asking. I'm not really sure. But like 4 hours for the massive size of this house, I don't know. I don't know.
1996. They had spent just shy of 4 hours inside the home. As investigators were making their way out of the crime scene, the media was offering Boulder residents the first glimpse into what was known about the murder. One of the first articles to be released, published at 12:15 a.m. by the Boulder Daily Camera, was headlined "Missing Girl Found Dead." Journalists had little to go on, but were able to report that JonBenet was believed to have been kidnapped early that morning, only for her body to be found in the afternoon. The cause of death was homicide, but the child had not been shot or stabbed, according to Sergeant Mason. Neighbors and friends had been contacted, and the consensus was clear. The Ramseys were the perfect family. They are such congenial people, the best neighbors, offered Joe Barnhill, who the Ramseys had trusted to watch Jacques, JonBenet's beloved Bichon Frise. Dee Dee Nelson Schneider, a friend and co-worker of Patsy's, gushed about how she was a doting, loving, incredible mother. Far from being detached or neglectful, John and Patsy Ramsey spoiled their daughter and were extremely supportive and encouraging of her passion for pageantry. But while they were so serious about this beauty queen stuff, she told the camera, they never put any pressure on her. Investigators were keen to know how accurate those descriptions were, but first, they needed to know what had killed JonBenet. Dr. John Meyer began the autopsy of JonBenet Ramsey at 8:15 a.m. on December 27, 1996, with detectives and the DA office staff in the room. First, the ME covered his initial examination of the body from the previous evening, describing how she was lying on her back, her head turned to the right side, and her arms extended out over her head. Immediately visible were the ligatures around her wrists and neck, as well as a small area of abrasion or contusion below the right ear, and a prominent dried abrasion on the lower left neck. Next came the exterior examination. Meyer noted that JonBenet wore a white collarless long-sleeve shirt with a silver sequin star on the chest. Tied loosely around her right wrist over top of the sleeve was a loop of white cord tied with a knot. One tail of the knot extended 5.5 inches in length and terminated in a frayed end. The other tail measured 15.5 inches and had been tied off to form another loop at the other end. The tail of that knot also terminated in a frayed end. Up near the right armpit was a dried brown stain measuring 2.5 inches by 1.5 inches, which Meyer noted was consistent with mucus from the nose or mouth. On her legs, JonBenet wore white long johns with an elastic waistband bearing red and blue stripes. The long johns were stained yellow in the front, particularly in the crotch and thigh areas, and beneath them she wore a pair of Bloomie's brand underwear. On those underwear were printed red roses and the word Wednesday. Like the long johns,
So she didn't have underwear, or she didn't have diapers on when she went to bed, but it seems like if she has like a bedwetting issue that had started again previously to this happening, so like why wasn't she in her diapers?
And thigh areas, and beneath them she wore a pair of Bloomie's brand underwear. On those underwear were printed red roses and the word Wednesday. Like the long johns, the underwear were stained yellow, but they also had several red areas of staining measuring up to 1/2 inch in maximum dimension. As for evidence of injury beyond the 3/8 inch by 1/4 inch abrasion below her right ear and the triangular rust-colored 3/4 inch by 1.5 inch abrasion on her neck, the most significant was that caused by the ligature. Dr. Meyer described it as a length of white cord similar to that tied around the right wrist. He cut the cord, marked where he had done so with a black marker, and measured it. Extending from the knot on the posterior side of the neck, he noted, are 2 tails of the knot, one measuring 4 inches in length and having a frayed end, and the other measuring 17 inches in length with the end tied in multiple loops around a length of round tan wooden stick, which measures 4.5 inches in length. The stick was irregularly broken at both ends, with several colors of paint and apparent glistening varnish on the surface. The word Korea was printed in gold lettering, while the tail end of another word extended from beneath the knot. JonBenet's hair was wrapped up in both the knot at the back of her neck, as well as the knot wrapped around the stick. And this, like the wooden splinters found next to the tote box and the stick that looked similar to this one that was found in the tote box, suggested that this weapon was manufactured in the home during the crime and not brought in from the outside.
Right. Which begs the question, of did somebody actually break in, Like, I feel like this is like where stuff starts getting really weird.
The signature mark this instrument had created was a deep furrow which encircled her entire neck. It was horizontal in orientation with little upward deviation, suggesting it had been applied while JonBenet was lying down on her stomach and then pulled directly upward. In addition to that, the skin in and around the furrow showed signs of petechial hemorrhaging, meaning that the girl was alive when the ligature was applied and then used. In addition to the ligature mark and the aforementioned abrasions and hemorrhages, Dr. Meyer discovered another set of markings on the left side of JonBenet's lower back. They were dry, rust-colored, and of very small size. The more
Oh.
superior of the two, the examiner noted, measures 1/8 by 1/16 of an inch, while the smaller measures 3/16 by 1/8 of an inch, with no identifiable contusion. There were also two small scratch-like abrasions on the rear of the girl's lower left leg, almost in the midline and approximately 4 inches above the level of the heel. These two measured 1/16 by less than 1/16 of an inch and 1/8 by less than 1/16 of an inch, respectively.
Is that like somebody trying to grab her leg and then she, there's like a defensive wound of like her trying to get away and they like grabbed her leg and scratched her?
Less than 1/16 of an inch and 1/8 by less than 1/16 of an inch, respectively. There was, however, a more perplexing injury, which to that point had gone unnoticed by everybody. Upon his inspection of the genital area, Dr. Meyer took note of a small amount of dried blood found on the anterior aspect of the perineum along the edges of the closure of the labia minora. Similar markings were present on the skin of the fourchette and the vestibule. He continued, recording reddish hyperemia inside the vestibule and along the distal vaginal wall. Put into layman's terms, there was evidence of increased blood flow to the opening of the vaginal orifice, extending 1 centimeter into the canal. Additional abrasions could be seen on the hymenal orifice, with a very faint area of violet discoloration on the right labia majora, but without hemorrhage. Precisely what had caused any of the trauma to this region of the body was unclear, but something had certainly caused the bleeding, and it had happened very near to the end of JonBenet's life. Determining when that was an issue entirely of its own. At the time of autopsy, JonBenet was in mild rigor mortis of the elbows and shoulders, with more advanced 2 to 3 plus rigor mortis in the joints of the lower extremities. How the scale used works is not really defined within the report. Along with the rigor mortis, there was liver mortis, which is the pooling of blood and bodily fluids after death, present on her back. This was described as non-blanching, and blanching in this case refers to whether or not pale spots can be caused by pressure applied to an area affected by liver mortis. These findings placed her death sometime at least 18 to 24 hours before autopsy, but that was already known. From the external injuries and evidence, and without vitreous fluid or body temperature samples taken prior to refrigeration in the morgue, it was
Way to go. Way to go. Like, that was probably extremely important to know, because then we could have had a time of death.
Vitreous fluid or body temperature samples taken prior to refrigeration in the morgue, it was difficult to determine a time of death beyond sometime between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., which told investigators...
That's such a big window, though, between 10 a.m., Oh, I hate that. I hate that they didn't do that. That was so like we have like not a great estimate of her time of death, which would give us like a great window to know of like what exactly was going on. At least, to know that like it happened in the early morning hours, it happened at night, it happened the night before, any of that would have been helpful.
Of death beyond sometime between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., which told investigators effectively nothing of use. It was the internal exam that would give them the first steps towards establishing an exact time of death. As Meyer examined the organs, he found petechial hemorrhaging in the heart and lungs, consistent with ligature strangulation, but the real items of interest were the fragmented pieces of yellow to light green, tan apparent vegetable or fruit material, which would be identified as fresh cut, that meaning not canned, pineapple. This material was found in the duodenum, which is where the stomach connects to the small intestine. And its placement in the digestive system suggested that the time of death was approximately 2 to 5 hours after ingestion. This meant that they should be able to ascertain a rough time of death as long as they could determine when she had actually ingested the pineapple. It was a major breakthrough, but it was also far from being the only interesting thing uncovered during the internal examination.
So will the okay? So we know that probably one of them gave it to her because I don't think she was going to get it herself. So are they going to be forthcoming and truthful of what time she ate her pineapple?
Far from being the only interesting thing uncovered during the internal examination. After observing and recording the details of the majority of the internal organs, Dr. Meyer got to work on the head. Peeling back the scalp revealed a yet unnoticed injury. JonBenet had suffered a massive, devastating blow to the head. Extending from the top right side of her skull all the way down to the forehead was an 8.5-inch long fracture. At the top of the wound was a 1/2 inch by 3/4 inch irregularly rectangular hole where a fragment of the skull had been forced into the cranial cavity. The massive
Oh,
hemorrhaging that resulted
God.
from this injury showed that JonBenet had not died immediately after the blow was delivered, and Dr. Meyer concluded that this blow was most likely delivered before the strangulation occurred. While both injuries would have been fatal in their own right, it was the strangulation that killed her. While they did not yet have an exact time of death, they did have a manner and now a cause: asphyxiation by strangulation associated with craniocerebral trauma. It would be up to Eller's team of detectives to determine who did it.
Yeah, so she got hit in the back of the head extremely hard with something, because I mean that is a hard blow to the back of the head that she took, and then they strangled her to finish her off. So I mean, this all happened in the house. I mean, between her being strangled, because everything that was used to strangle her was found in the house. So then I would assume that whatever blunt object was used to knock her out is probably something from the house too. So then who was it?
Detective Steve Thomas was driving home from Denver. It was late, sometime after midnight on December 27, 1996, and the tired narcotics detective was on vacation. It was during this drive, with his wife of 8 months seated next to him, that he first heard about the case that would consume the next year and a half of his life. The radio crackled out the news story. A 6-year-old girl had been murdered in her home in a wealthy neighborhood of Boulder, apparently the victim of a kidnapping attempt gone bad. The detective was perplexed by one particular aspect, that being the fact that both a ransom note and a body were found. Why, he asked himself, would a kidnapper who wanted ransom money murder his victim and leave the body at the scene?
Yeah.
It seemed an odd decision by a financially motivated perpetrator. Even dead, the detective wrote in JonBenet Inside the Ramsey Murder Investigation, the body was valuable collateral because the family, unaware of the death, might still pay the money.
True. That is true. Like if you are missing and the family might believe that you are, I think they hold on to hope that you're still alive, right? But I think at the end of the day, they don't care. Like, even if you say that you killed her, they're going to ask for their child back because they're going to want to bury them, or they will be, they will pay whatever it is to just get their child back, dead or alive, So it's that is a very, very good point, because, we see that in a lot of different other true crime cases, like where children go missing and the parents are just like, I don't, they're like, I just want my child back. And I don't, if my child is dead, I want them back so I can bury them. Right. So that is really strange that between the ransom note and leaving JonBenet in the house like that does make a very weird situation for this whole thing.
Valuable collateral because the family, unaware of the death, might still pay the money. Some 8 hours later, Detective Thomas was sitting at his kitchen table reading the newspaper when the phone rang. He picked it up and heard the voice of his former SWAT team partner, Detective Ron Gosage, on the other end. Commander Eller wanted only his best for this case, and that meant pulling some of his people off of their assignments. According to Thomas, the Boulder Police Department had been eviscerated by resignations over the past several years, largely due to the policies and priorities of Chief Tom Kobe and Boulder County District Attorney Alex Hunter. Eller himself had originally come to quiet, generally safe Boulder after leaving the much more intense Miami, Florida Police Department. His superior, on the other hand, was not cut from the same cloth. Chief Kobe was appointed in 1991 to bring more sensitivity to the department, a man who quite literally held the motto of police others as you would have them police unto you. Kobe made a number of changes when he took over the department. Division chiefs and lieutenants were replaced with a new title of commander, which became the sole rank between sergeant and chief. The new chief also abolished inspections, scrapped the rules and regulations book, and replaced the standard field training manual with a value-based directive system that was more philosophical than practical. The cops...
Same. I'm not. I definitely have my opinions of Boulder, but this is ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous.
manual with a value-based directive system that was more philosophical than practical. The cops felt hamstrung. The street skills of officers eroded, writes Thomas, and experienced cops went elsewhere rather than be a part of the new culture. For Thomas, a veteran officer who began his career with the Wheat Ridge Police Department and then moved into their undercover division before transferring to Boulder in the same year as Kobe, it was stifling. When he uncovered a prostitution ring operating out of the city's nicest hotel and successfully shut it down, the city swept it under the rug and declared there was no prostitution problem in Boulder, despite the fact that prostitution...
Imagine that. Imagine that. I'm shocked. Ugh.
Rug and declared there was no prostitution problem in Boulder. Despite the fact that prostitution frequently goes hand in hand with sex trafficking, he was subsequently ordered not to work such cases unless there were public complaints. And this wasn't the...
Unless there were public complaints. Like, get out of here. Get the F out of here. This, I mean, as if my opinion of Boulder couldn't be any less. You know what? This is just, you know, it's just icing on the cake for that one.
Subsequently ordered not to work such cases unless there were public complaints. And this wasn't the only time. Once, Thomas and several other officers responded to a call regarding an enraged psychotic suspect who was waving two butcher knives in a busy downtown intersection on a hot summer day and screaming that someone is going to die. The man ended up charging Thomas, who proceeded to shoot him twice with his service weapon, apparently without killing him. Rather than being commended for putting his own life in danger in order to help others, he was reprimanded by Deputy DA Pete Hofstrom, who asked, "Couldn't you have just hit him with a stick or something?" The following year...
Yes, let's just hit him with a stick or something while this man is dual wielding. Yes, that sounds like a great idea. Ugh, my God. This is so frustrating to listen to. It just makes me so angry because it makes me angry because I feel like because of this whole situation with JonBenet got so messed up and everything that could go wrong does go wrong. And then I don't know like what's going to happen at the end of this. If like, you know, this department's just going to be like, you know, oh, well, I get, you know, like it is what it is. Like, well, I guess we're never going to figure it out, you know, which is disgusting because had you, I don't know, done stuff by the book, like there's protocols for a reason because, you know, we want to preserve everything that we can. And you mucked it up. You mucked it up so bad that like, I don't, you know, it's like, well, we're never going to know at this point.
Pete Hofstrom, who asked, "Couldn't you have just hit him with a stick or something?" The following year, while working with the SWAT team, Thomas once again had to fire his weapon, this time at a suicidal armed suspect who had already shot at his wife. The man pointed a pistol at the officers, and Thomas did what he should have done in that situation and shot him 3 times. This time, the suspect did not survive. Once again, Internal Affairs was none too pleased, and the officer was forced to take conflict resolution classes. So, when the Ramsey investigation began...
That was the conflict resolution. This man, I mean, this man is doing everything right and he's getting punished for it. Ugh.
And the officer was forced to take conflict resolution classes. So, when the Ramsey investigation began, Thomas was one of the few detectives left on the staff who had any experience with violent felonies, and Eller needed him more for this than he needed him working undercover narcotics. So,
oh, well, there's a surprise, maybe because like you ran your department into the ground and you don't have anybody that's like competent anymore, and you have this guy, which are you even going to listen to him? I mean, this man is probably very well, you know, experienced and probably knows a lot. So maybe you should let this man do his job. Will they, is the question.
And Eller needed him more for this than he needed him working undercover narcotics. So it was that on the morning of December 27th, 1996, Detective Steve Thomas shaved his beard, put on his suit, and made a mental note to get his long hair trimmed. Upon arriving at the station that morning, he learned that the autopsy on JonBenet had been performed earlier in the day and that it had been determined the cause of death was ligature strangulation in association with massive cranial trauma. One of the very first things that police did after assembling their detective team was draft a new warrant for the Ramsey home, with the intention to search for whatever weapon may have been used to strike the girl in the head, and to find any dark fabric which might be responsible for one of the dark fibers found on her body. Though such a warrant should have been granted essentially immediately under such circumstances, the DA's office refused to submit it to a judge for several hours, demanding, once again, rewrites and revisions.
Why? Why? Like, I would love to know why, because this seems ridiculous. I mean, basically the time is ticking, like since we found her, right? And then you want to like throw a wrench into this? Why? Why? You just look sus, Mr. DA.
It to a judge for several hours, demanding, once again, rewrites and revisions. When they were eventually able to get into the house, investigators retrieved a red brick with fibers stuck to it from the fireplace and a golf club with blonde hair on it from the backyard. In addition to the search for weapons and fibers, investigators were also tasked with seeking evidence of another trauma. It was the opinion of Dr. Meyer, as well as Dr. Andy Sarantak of the Denver Children's Hospital's Child Protection Team, that JonBenet had been subjected to sexual abuse shortly before her death, and that it may not have been the first time. In JonBenet's room, detectives looking for further evidence of such a crime noted that ultraviolet light revealed stains on the bed and surrounding carpet, but they were unable to identify what had caused them at the time. In addition to these findings, detectives determined that, aside from the broken basement window, there appeared to be no other possible points of entry into the home. Another potentially interesting discovery was a New International Version Bible on the desk of John Ramsey, open to Psalms 35 and 36. The former begins, "Contend, Lord, with those who contend with me. Fight against those who fight against me. Take up shield and armor. Arise and come to my aid. Brandish spear and javelin against those who pursue me. Say to me, I am your salvation." The first letter of the first word of each of the first 4 sentences, those being contend, take, brandish, and say, formed a familiar acronym when reversed, SBTC. While one team searched the Ramsey property, other detectives worked to interview as many people as possible regarding the events of that evening. Neighbors on 3 sides of the Ramseys were available.
Is it odd that we have so many coincidences, or at this point is it just not a coincidence, but we have to figure out either who did it within this family and why? And I mean, it just seems like we have a little too many coincidences going on here
Regarding the events of that evening. Neighbors on 3 sides of the Ramseys were available, and they shared what they knew eagerly. The Colby family, who lived behind the Ramseys, said that their 2 dogs barked every time they heard somebody coming through the alley between the properties. And yet the dogs had not barked the night that JonBenet was killed. The Brumfitt household, directly south of the Ramsey home, found it notable that the light in the sunroom, typically left on at night, had been turned off on that fateful evening. Scott Gibbons, the neighbor to the north, told detectives that he had been in his south-facing kitchen around midnight when he observed that the upper lights in the Ramsey kitchen were on, but dimmed low. He had not seen anybody inside at the time and considered that unusual since it was the first time he had noticed that light being on in the Ramsey home. All of this was interesting and potentially valuable information, but it wasn't definitive in any given direction.
That's true too. I mean, it's helpful and it's not, right? It's like clearly there's some odd things going on that are not typical for the Ramsey household, but it doesn't actually tell us anything directly.
The more insightful interviews were those with people who knew the Ramseys particularly well. The housekeeper, Linda Hoffman Pugh, former nanny, Susan Savage, Ramsey family pilot, Mike Archuleta, and Fleet White, who had been with John when he uncovered the body in the so-called wine cellar. Linda and Merv Hoffman Pugh managed to focus suspicion on themselves by being as cooperative in their second interview as they had been in their first, giving police absolutely everything they asked for. Did they have black duct tape? Yep, 3 rolls and only 1 unused. Did they have notepad paper? Yes, and not only did it look like it could be a match for the pads found inside the Ramseys' home, but that was in fact where it had come from. Did they have a key to the home? They had 2. Did they have any felt-tip pens like the one used to write the ransom note? They had 3. Did they have nylon rope or cord? Yes, and they even had some wrapped around a stick. While not conclusive without further testing, the evidence was not making them look good. On the other hand, whoever wrote that ransom note appears to have been well-educated, and neither Linda, who dropped out of school at 15 to raise the first of 6 children...
Okay, so she's not on that level, because as we went through the ransom note, if she dropped out when she was 15 and was having kids very young, she's not writing this letter.
Nor Merv, a toothless alcoholic in his 50s, seemed like the type to use the words hence and attaché.
Yes.
The police would have to keep an eye on it. The interview with Suzanne Savage was enlightening as well, although for different reasons. She hadn't worked for the Ramseys full-time in over 2 years, but could recall that the Ramseys were very careful about locking their doors, though they had forgotten she still had a key. She also remembered that JonBenet usually slept with her door open, which contrasted with Patsy's earlier statements that the door had been closed on the morning of the girl's death. This posed the question, would a kidnapper really have bothered closing the door? Such an action would be an unnecessary complication of the process, made more difficult by the need.
It's usually the opposite too, or the door's just always open. So like if your kid sleeps with the door open and somebody comes in and kidnaps him, like the door's not going to be shut, the door's going to be left open. And if your kid does sleep with the door shut, usually they'll be like, oh, I noticed that my kid's door was open and they sleep with the door shut all the time, you know? So the fact that it's closed after the fact is kind of weird, because I feel like in most cases, either way, like the door's probably going to be open.
Door. Such an action would be an unnecessary complication of the process, made more difficult by the need to restrain and keep quiet a 6-year-old girl. With regard to the Ramsey family overall, she was very complimentary, with the exception of JonBenet's rebellious streak. According to Savage, sometimes JonBenet needed to be given a timeout for doing things such as stomping on Burke's Lego creations. When she wasn't antagonizing her brother, however, she enjoyed playing with her toys and painting in the basement, something Patsy had recently taken up as well. What puzzled her was the location of the body. Someone would have to know the house well just to find the little room, she told investigators.
Right.
Mike Archuleta wasn't particularly familiar with the Ramsey home, but he was able to confirm that John called him twice on the 26th to arrange for a flight to Atlanta in his 1972 twin-engine Beechcraft King Air C-90. Archuleta was already at the airport prepping the plane for its flight to Michigan when John called him the first time, informing the pilot that JonBenet was missing. When he called the second time with the news that her body had been found, he asked how long it would take to get the plane ready to fly to Georgia.
Okay, like that makes you look bad. This right here, I mean, guilty or not, this does not put you in a good light whatsoever.
Archuleta told him 2 hours, but shortly afterward, Fleet White called and canceled the plans to fly. When investigators met with White on the evening of the 27th, they were surprised to learn that Ramsey attorneys and their investigators had already interviewed him earlier in the day. In fact, they'd called him on the previous day as well, just after the Ramseys had left for the Fernies. Beginning with the events on the morning of the 26th, White explained that Patsy called his home phone early Thursday morning. She didn't say precisely what had happened, just that she needed them to come over as soon as possible. It was only upon the Whites' arrival that they were informed of the specifics, that JonBenet had been kidnapped, and that a ransom note had been left behind by the perpetrator. Much as with Officer French and Sergeant Reichenbach, White felt that something was off about the situation. It was for this reason that he chose to search the home himself, sometime within the first 15 minutes that he was there. He told the detectives that the year...
Whether this is good intentions or not, like you should have had somebody with you. You should have had some sort of law enforcement with you. Somebody. I mean, I'm not like saying that this was bad, but it was bad. Okay. Like, you know, like we can't just be letting people roam around that we don't know. Like, we don't know a whole lot at this, you know, like when this initially happened and then he's roaming the house in the first 15 minutes on his own. No, we just can't be having that.
Prior, his own 6-year-old daughter, Daphne, had gone missing from his home. She was eventually found somewhere in the house, but as a result of this ordeal, he was very familiar with the feeling of fear that arises when you've lost track of a child. Skeptical of the ransom note, White called out JonBenet's name as he poked around the house. While downstairs in the train room, he found himself looking at a broken window pane in a series of 3 windows that opened to a subterranean window well. He observed that the window was closed but not latched, with a hard-sided Samsonite suitcase sitting beneath it, flush to the wall. Despite the broken window, however, there was no glass on the floor or on the sill, not even under the suitcase, which he moved in order to check for debris. All the glass he found was a single small kernel, which he placed on the windowsill before leaving the room. Next, he proceeded to the wine cellar, unlocked the door, and opened it to peer inside. The tiny, windowless room was pitch black, and Fleet couldn't find a light switch. Seeing nothing, he closed the door and moved the wood block locking mechanism at the top back into place before proceeding back upstairs. He clarified to police that he had told nobody about his sweep and kept his findings to himself until he returned to the basement with John later that day. As more and more people showed up over the course of the next hour, including crime scene techs, victim advocates, and even the family's reverend, he became concerned about Burke. There was quite a bit of activity going on in the house, and the 9-year-old boy was still upstairs in his bedroom. It was White's own idea to get Burke out of the house, partially so that he wouldn't have to see his mother in such a distraught condition. It was agreed that Burke would go over to the Whites, and the Fernies also decided that they would send their children over there as well, so that all the kids could be together. White indicated that Burke was retrieved from his bedroom by his father, writes Kohler, and according to the latter, was told that his sister was missing. Burke dressed himself, grabbed his Nintendo, and was ushered out the door at 8 a.m. When Fleet White accompanied John Ramsey into the basement around 1 p.m. that day, he recalled that the latter said he had broken the window the prior summer after locking himself out of the house.
Right.
He and Patsy...
We do remember that from the first video, that's what he said about the window downstairs.
Had supposedly cleaned up the glass, but neglected to have the window fixed. White didn't say anything to his friend about where the suitcase had been placed when he went into the room earlier that morning, but he did aid John in looking for glass shards until Ramsey left the room. At that point, Fleet attempted to move a fireplace grate from in front of a closet door in case the child somehow ended up in there, only to hear John begin screaming from the wine cellar. White ran towards that room, and according to James Kohler, he indicated that he was right behind Ramsey and saw him kneeling down next to JonBenet's body. He turned the corner into that hallway just as John flipped on the light switch, revealing JonBenet wrapped in a blanket on the floor. When John brought his daughter up out of the basement, White said that Detective Arndt directed Ramsey to put her down at the top of the basement stairs, and she then subsequently moved the body to the floor of the living room. After Detective Arndt ordered White to watch over the basement stairs to ensure nobody else went down, he again went to the basement and took a look around the wine cellar. He never explained why he did this, but he did tell investigators that he handled a piece of black duct tape from the floor and also handled a cigar box in the room. After that, he...
Bro, I get the intention is good, but you cannot be doing this. You can't be doing this. Oh my goodness.
Black duct tape from the floor and also handled a cigar box in the room. After that, he went back to the first floor. Curious behavior, but not necessarily criminal. There would need to be more interviews with Fleet White. The most important interview of all, however, was proving rather difficult to conduct. At 9:30 p.m. on the 27th, Detective Arndt and Sergeant Mason knocked on the door of the Fernie home. They were expecting the usual response from the family of a murdered child, that being total cooperation. Instead, John refused to talk to them in private. The grieving parents were flanked by John's brother Jeff, the family pediatrician Dr. Both, the family's financial advisor Rod Westmoreland, and a family friend by the name of Mike Bynum.
What? All these people were like in there with him? And then he's like, no, I'm not going to talk to you. Why wouldn't you want to talk to them? Unless you were trying to hide something.
Financial advisor Rod Westmoreland and a family friend by the name of Mike Bynum. Dr. Both said that Patsy wasn't in any condition to be interviewed given her fragile emotional state, while Bynum, an influential local attorney with connections in the DA's office, introduced himself to Arndt and Mason and explained that he would be providing John Ramsey with legal advice. As it turned out, the attorneys who had spoken to Fleet White shortly after 2:30 p.m. on the 26th had been sent by Bynum. The Ramseys had lawyered up. For 40 minutes, the investigators attempted to interview John in the presence of his lawyer, but were unable to learn anything useful about the night in question. John had indeed broken that basement window 4 months earlier, having kicked the pane out with his foot in order to reach through and unlatch it. He emphasized that the grate was not secured by a lock, nor had the window been fixed. Beyond that, Arndt and Mason were informed that Patsy had recently beaten cancer, that this was a hard time of year for the family due to the January 8th anniversary of John's eldest daughter Beth's tragic death in a car accident, and that they planned to bury JonBenet in Atlanta next to her older sister. As for suspects, John was still steadfast on Jeff Merrick, and he was considering posting a reward for information about his daughter. Any questions about the actual night of the murder, however, went unanswered, and the Ramseys...
I see that. There are some weird tangents that they were going off of, and then we got absolutely zero help. We had no information as far as the the people that are living there, that are the parents that are I mean, we got nothing. We got absolutely nothing out of them.
Any questions about the actual night of the murder, however, went unanswered, and the Ramseys were non-committal about when they'd be willing to sit for a formal interview. The first 48 hours of any homicide investigation are crucial to solving the case.
Yes.
As this is the time frame in which the crime scene is the most pristine, memories are most fresh, and the police have the most control over the flow of information. As Detective Linda Arndt and Sergeant Larry Mason left the Fernie residence just after 10 p.m., the first 48 hours of the investigation into the murder of JonBenet Ramsey came to a close. The crime scene was contaminated beyond salvage, the most important witnesses were refusing to talk, and within the week, the department's grasp on the information available to the public would begin to slip away faster than they could ever have imagined. Solving this case was going to be an uphill battle, and it was one they were already losing. It was only going to get worse. I would love to tell you exactly what it is that we're going to be covering in the next part of this video, but the more I have researched, the more I have written, the more things have changed. This video was not what I expected it to be, and chances are the next one won't be either.
This is
I'm currently
fantastic.
expecting there to be 2 more parts of this series. There might end up being more. But what I do know is that this is by far one of the most convoluted cases I've ever looked at. In terms of recent things, it reminds me of Sebastian Rogers, and I do think that I'm going to end up doing a similar level of analysis of the interviews, the way that everything tied together, who contradicted who where, and try and present that, an analysis of that, in tandem with all of the evidence that's
I would love to watch that one too. I have heard about Sebastian.
Already been accumulated and presented over and over again by the people who are interested in this case. One thing I have seen over and over again as I have dove into this topic is that most of the people who are on one side or another, and definitely the people on one particular side, frequently do not have the complete information. The Netflix documentary on this was just a travesty that I don't think can even really be put into words.
I don't doubt that one bit. I bet that one was not good. I haven't seen it, but if you've seen it, let me know. Do you agree with him? Do you agree that it was bad?
Because you had all the people who had their opinions before it came out. And then this documentary comes and it just leaves out everything. Anything that might go against the narrative it's trying to present isn't just explained away. For the most part, it's completely ignored. They never bring up the pineapple, for example. They never mention that the DNA samples were incomplete. So in the next couple of videos, I'll be getting into all of that. And chances are, if you're watching these, you probably already know which way I'm leaning, but I will say this. I am not firm on any given conclusion yet. It is possible that as I uncover more evidence, as I go back through more things, my position will change. I don't know for certain whether it will, but I need it to be made clear that I am willing to adjust my perspective based on the evidence.
Yeah,
I'm not
absolutely.
locked into any one conclusion right now.
I am like that too. I definitely have my suspicions, but because I have not done this deep dive into it, there's definitely a lot that I don't know. So I'm not like a you can't change my mind stance. I'm definitely with him. If we uncover more stuff and it ends up changing my original assumption of who I think it was, then so be it. Like I'm definitely not like set in stone of who I think it is, and that's not going to change my mind.
But this is quite a job. It is something that takes a lot of time. I was up until 4 a.m. most nights of the past 2 weeks.
Oh my gosh.
So if you want to support what we're doing here at the Lore Lodge, so I can hopefully, take a break every once in a while, you can subscribe to our Patreon for just $1 a month, or you can join this channel and become a member for just $1 a month. This gets you access to exclusive episodes that are from our Liquid Lore series,
Be sure to support
as well as
him.
a few other perks if you join the Patreon side. That is the one we recommend.
This was very, very well done. I love that he did the first 48 of this, because I feel like there's probably a lot that was missed. As for me, I know that I did not follow this as deeply. I mean, I wasn't that old when this happened, but I do remember this like always kind of like popping up here and there throughout the years. And so this is like my first like real like deep dive into it. So I do love that we have like this timeline of what happened in in the first 48 hours, because it is so important. The first 48 hours of you know, when homicides and stuff like this happen, like it is very, very crucial. That being said, a lot of weird things have happened, and I am so irate with the fact that so much was failed, and this little girl deserves justice, and and we deserve to know exactly what happened. And I kind of feel like we're never going to know. I mean, there's so much contamination that happened with this that I honestly don't know. I don't know if we're ever really going to know what truly happened to her, and if we're ever going to know everything that kind of occurred here. And that kind of breaks my heart for her, because, you know, she's just a little girl who should have been protected and clearly wasn't. And whether or not, you know, this is, I mean, I think this is very like an internal thing. I don't think this was an external thing. But regardless, you know, she deserves to have justice. I do find this case to be extremely interesting, but so infuriating at the same time, because we just have so many things that have gone wrong, people that should have known better, you know, and now we have the parents that don't want to talk to law enforcement in one of the most peak important times that we need to have information, and they're like basically just shutting up about it. I don't know, like that makes me angry. There's so many things about this that make me angry, but he did a fantastic job though. Lord Lodge did a phenomenal job with this. I absolutely love this series so far. I can't wait for the next one. But yeah, he is phenomenal. Absolutely love him. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I appreciate you guys being here. I know this was a long one, but I hope that you are enjoying this journey with me, and I am looking forward to part 3, as I hope you guys are too. Be sure to go like and subscribe to the Lord Lodge, because he has really put in so much time and effort in this, and I really, really appreciate being able to watch this and kind of, you know, come to my own opinions of it. So be sure to give him lots of support. But that's going to do it for me. I hope you guys had a great day, and I will see you in the next one.